I didn't hear a knock. I saw the paper first. Bright white, perfectly centered, taped like it wanted to be seen. This business is illegal. Not might be, not under review. Illegal, full stop. There was no name at the bottom. No explanation. Just a bold deadline and a quiet threat hiding behind professional wording. Cease operations immediately or enforcement action will follow. Before I could tear it down, my phone buzzed. Email, same notice. HOA portal alert, same language, community post, public, comments open. They didn't just want me shut down, they wanted me cornered. The language was plain, corporate, and intentionally vague. Phrases like unauthorized commercial activity, risk exposure, and failure to comply will escalate. Words designed to scare first and clarify never. What hit me wasn't the accusation. It was the timing. Nothing had changed. Same operation, same footprint, same rules. The only difference was that the business had finally crossed a line they didn't like. It was profitable. I refreshed the HOA post and watched the comments stack up in real time. This was inevitable. We warned him. The board is protecting property values. Interesting, considering no one had ever warned me about anything. Still, no call from the HOA, no request for documents. No meeting invite, just pressure, public, fast, and confident. That's when I knew this wasn't enforcement. When organizations skip questions and jump straight to threats, they're not trying to solve a problem, they're testing compliance. They're betting you'll panic, apologize, or shut up before checking the fine print. I didn't do any of that. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I let them talk. Because the fastest way to expose a weak position is to let the other side oversell it. And they were already talking like people who hadn't checked their own records. Before we go any further, hit subscribe if you want real accountability stories. No fake drama, no shouting, just calm pressure, clean receipts, and systems collapsing under their own paperwork. That notice wasn't the win they thought it was. It was the first mistake. My name is Daniel. I'm not someone who reacts just because a message sounds urgent or looks official. I don't make decisions based on capital letters or on people who treat authority as a personality trait. I've spent enough time around contracts, compliance reviews, and internal audits to recognize a bluff when I see one. So when the notice called my business illegal, I didn't feel threatened. I felt curious. Because that word, illegal, has weight, and people who use it correctly don't hide behind tone. They cite specifics, statutes, clauses, limitations. This notice did none of that. And then there was Melissa Grant. Every HOA has one. Melissa wasn't officially the president, but she didn't need the title. She ran the board by momentum alone. Mid-40s, always polished, always prepared. The kind of woman who spoke in absolutes and treated questions like inconveniences. She didn't say, "We'll review this." She said, "This has already been decided." Her fingerprints were all over the situation. The emails came from the HOA account, but the voice was unmistakable. Melissa's tone, sharp, certain. Slightly dismissive. Written like compliance was something she allowed instead of something she had to justify. She had confidence. The dangerous kind. I'd seen this pattern before. Something grows quietly. Someone notices late. Control starts to feel optional. And suddenly, rules get reinterpreted. Not rewritten, not voted on, just quietly reframed as obvious. Most people respond the same way when someone like Melissa applies pressure. They rush to explain themselves. They try to sound reasonable. They argue facts while the other side escalates the tone. That's exactly what Melissa expected from me. Emotion creates noise. Noise creates mistakes. I don't make mistakes when I'm being pressured. I slow everything down. I read every sentence. I look for what's missing. I pay attention to what's being asserted without support, because confidence without citation isn't authority, it's exposure. And Melissa was starting to expose herself. Her emails got longer, more detailed, more absolute. Each one locked her into claims she couldn't easily walk back. She clearly thought I'd either fold quietly or react publicly. Both outcomes would have reinforced her control. I did neither. I stayed silent long enough for her certainty to turn into overconfidence, long enough for assumptions to harden into written positions. Because here's the part Melissa didn't account for: you don't beat systems by challenging them out loud. You beat them by letting them contradict themselves on paper. And once that starts happening, the ending isn't emotional. It's procedural. Before Melissa Grant ever said the word illegal, everything was quiet, not perfect, just normal. The business ran without noise, no foot traffic issues, no complaints. No emails from the HOA asking questions or requesting clarification. It existed in the background of the neighborhood the same way delivery trucks, dog walkers, and lawn crews did, noticed, but not scrutinized. That wasn't an accident. I designed it that way. No signage, no disruption, no gray areas pushed for attention. The HOA had access to everything they needed to know. The filings were clean. The activity was disclosed exactly as required. Nothing hidden, nothing improvised. And for a long time, no one cared. That's usually how it goes when things are small enough not to threaten anyone's sense of control. The neighbors were indifferent in the best way. Some nodded, some asked polite questions. A few didn't even know what I did, and that was fine. Peaceful anonymity is underrated. The HOA meetings came and went, landscaping debates, parking reminders, budget discussions. My name never came up, until it did. The shift wasn't dramatic. It never is at first. It started with looks, longer glances during community events. Melissa is watching instead of talking. A pause when conversations passed near me, questions framed casually but timed deliberately. How long has this been running? Has it always been this busy? Is this considered commercial? Not accusations, probes. At the time, I didn't react. I answered plainly, honestly. I had no reason to. Everything I said aligned with what was already on record, but Melissa wasn't listening for answers. She was measuring growth, measuring attention. Measuring whether something she didn't control had started to matter, and once something matters, it becomes a problem. That's when the tone shifted. Emails that used to be neutral became precise, shorter, firmer. Phrases like "for your awareness" and "pending review" began to appear. Still nothing official, still no violations, just presence, pressure without action. That's the stage most people miss, the quiet moment before escalation. The moment where nothing is technically wrong, but someone has decided it will be. Melissa didn't move fast. She waited. And when she finally did move, it wasn't with questions. It was with a conclusion. The first official violation came 3 days later. Not by mail, not in person, by email, subject line, "Immediate compliance required." It was short, direct, and written as the decision had already been made. Melissa Grant claimed my business violated HOA rules by operating a commercial activity inside a residential area. She didn't explain how. She didn't explain when it suddenly became a problem. She just said it was no longer permitted. That phrase stood out. No longer. It meant one thing. She knew it had been allowed before. The email didn't list a rule number. It didn't quote the bylaws. It didn't attach any document. It just said the board had reviewed the situation and decided I had to shut down immediately. No warning, no correction period, no vote mentioned, just an order. I read it twice, then a third time, still nothing specific. So I replied with a simple question: "Can you please point me to the rule that says this is not allowed?" That was it. No attitude, no defense, just a request. Her response came fast, too fast. "This is clearly against community standards," she wrote. "Operating a business puts the neighborhood at risk. We expect cooperation." Again, no rule. I asked again. Calm, clear. "Which section of the bylaws?" This time she didn't answer the question at all. Instead, she attached a fine schedule, a daily penalty if I didn't comply, late fees, possible legal action. That's when I understood what was happening. Melissa wasn't enforcing a rule. She was creating pressure. She wanted me scared. She wanted me to rush. She wanted me to shut it down before I had time to look too closely. But pressure only works if you accept it. I didn't. I didn't argue. I didn't explain my business. I didn't defend myself. I asked the same question a third time. "Please show me the rule." That email went unanswered. Instead, a new notice appeared on the HOA portal, public, pinned. Same message as before, but louder. Words like violation and non-compliance were now visible to everyone. Melissa had officially moved from quiet control to public force, and once she did that, there was no going back. I asked for a meeting, not to argue, not to defend myself, just to hear her say it out loud. The meeting was scheduled for the next afternoon at the HOA office. Small room, long table. Melissa was sitting at the center as she belonged there. 2 board members beside her, quiet, uncomfortable, already checked out. Melissa smiled when I walked in. It wasn't friendly, it was confident. "Daniel," she said, folding her hands. "We are glad you could make time. This situation needs to be resolved quickly." Resolved, not discussed. I sat down and asked the same question I'd already asked 3 times in writing. "Can you show me the rule that says my business isn't allowed?" Melissa didn't answer right away. She leaned back in her chair and said, "This isn't about one rule, it's about the spirit of the community." That told me everything. I waited. Let the silence sit. She continued, "Your operation has grown. It's no longer appropriate for a residential area." I nodded, calm. "Which rule?" I asked again. One of the board members shifted in his seat. The other stared at the table. Melissa's smile tightened. "We don't need to quote a section number for something obvious," she said. "The board has discretion." That word, discretion, was doing a lot of work. I opened my notebook and slid a printed copy of the HOA bylaws across the table. "Can you mark the section for me?" I asked. Melissa didn't touch it. Instead, her tone changed. "If you continue pushing this," she said, "we'll have to escalate. Fines will increase. Legal options are on the table." There it was, not clarity, not proof, a threat. I looked at her and said evenly, "I'm not pushing anything. I'm asking for documentation." Melissa's eyes narrowed. "You're being difficult." That made one of the board members look up. I didn't respond. I just waited. Eventually, Melissa ended the meeting. "We expect compliance by the end of the week," she said. "Otherwise, enforcement will continue." No vote, no paperwork, no answer. As I stood up to leave, I realized something important. Melissa wasn't confident because she was right. She was confident because no one had challenged her before. And now that I had, she was running out of room. Melissa didn't wait until the end of the week. She started the next morning. At 8:05 a.m., I received a new notice. Daily fines are activated. No explanation, no reference, just a number attached to my name. By noon, the HOA portal had another post. This one wasn't about rules. It was about tone. Words like non-cooperative, unwilling to comply, and risk to the community were used carefully, but the message was clear. I was being labeled. That afternoon, an inspector showed up. Not the city, not county, HOA. He stood on the sidewalk, took photos, and didn't say much, just nodded and wrote things down. When I asked what he was looking for, he said, "Just documenting." The next day, another fine appeared. This one was for something new, something unrelated, something that had never been an issue before. The pattern was obvious. If Melissa couldn't prove the main violation, she'd stack smaller ones until the pressure became unbearable. Classic move. The fines kept coming, one for operational impact, one for failure to comply, one for ongoing violation. Each one is vague. Each one is expensive, and all of them signed off by Melissa. Meanwhile, none of this applied to anyone else. Other residents ran side projects, online work, home offices, no notices, no fines, no inspections, only me. That's when I knew this wasn't enforcement. It was retaliation. Melissa had shifted from trying to win the argument to trying to exhaust me. She wanted me tired, overwhelmed, willing to shut it down just to make it stop. But pressure only works when it's loud. This pressure was messy. Every fine contradicted the last one. Every notice used a different language, different reasoning, different timelines. She was moving too fast. And when people move too fast, they leave trails. I stopped responding completely. No emails, no appeals, no explanations. Instead, I started saving everything: screenshots, timestamps, notice versions, fine schedules. I noticed something important. The wording kept changing, but the conclusions stayed the same. That told me Melissa wasn't enforcing rules. She was working backward from a decision she'd already made. And every time she added a new violation, she was writing herself deeper into a corner. She didn't realize it yet, but the retaliation was doing more damage to her position than silence ever could. Once the fines started piling up, I stopped thinking in days. I started thinking in documents. Every notice Melissa sent went into a folder, not just saved, organized, date, time, version number. Screenshot of how it appeared on the HOA portal, copy of the email, copy of the attachment. I didn't trust anything to stay the same, because it wasn't. One notice said my business was a commercial operation. Another called it a service activity. A third labeled it unauthorized use. 3 different accusations. Same conclusion, that matters. I pulled the HOA bylaws and printed them, highlighted every section related to home use, businesses, and board authority. Then I compared those sections to Melissa's language. They didn't match. Not even close. I noticed something else. The fines weren't approved the same way. Some had board references, some didn't. A few listed dates didn't line up with meeting schedules. One fine was issued on a day the HOA office was officially closed. That's sloppy. Then I looked at enforcement. Other homeowners were running side businesses, consulting, online sales, home studios, all disclosed, all visible, none fined. Only me. That pattern was impossible to ignore. I requested HOA records, meeting minutes, vote logs, and enforcement history. They had 30 days to respond. Melissa responded in 3, too fast. She sent partial documents. Missing pages, redacted sections, summaries instead of originals. She claimed it was everything relevant. It wasn't. I compared her response to older records I'd downloaded months earlier, back when this was just a quiet business and not a problem. That's when the gaps showed up. A meeting where my business was supposedly discussed wasn't mentioned anywhere in the minutes. A board decision had no vote recorded. And the biggest mistake, one email. Melissa had written, "We need to shut this down before it becomes harder." Before, that sentence wasn't about rules, it wasn't about safety, it was about timing. I didn't respond to it, I didn't acknowledge it, I saved it. By this point, the picture was clear. Melissa hadn't enforced the policy, she'd invented urgency, and every attempt to pressure me had created more evidence against her. She thought speed was her advantage. It wasn't. Speed creates errors. And errors leave paper trails. I closed the folder, backed it up twice, and waited. Because now it wasn't about whether Melissa was wrong. It was about when she'd be forced to explain herself. The moment Melissa said, "Commercial activity is not allowed," something felt off. Not wrong, off. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I didn't even defend myself. I just asked one question. "Can you show me where this rule was applied before?" Melissa blinked, just once. Then she smiled, that tight HOA smile, the one that looks professional but feels rehearsed. "We don't need precedent," she said. "We enforce when necessary." That sentence stuck with me, because 3 doors down, Brian ran an online insurance brokerage. Across the street, Amanda did full-time real estate consulting from her home office. Both listed their businesses openly on LinkedIn. Both had clients. Both had revenue. Neither had violations. Nothing about my business had changed. Same house, same hours, same laptop, same Zoom calls. The only difference? Revenue. The quarter before, my consulting firm crossed 6 figures. That's when the letters started. That's when Melissa started noticing things. That's when the HOA suddenly cared. I asked for the written violation file. She sent a PDF. 3 pages, generic language. No photos, no timestamps, no proof. Just one sentence highlighted in yellow. Any business activity deemed disruptive to residential harmony may be prohibited. Deemed by whom? She didn't say. So I pulled HOA records, meeting minutes, archived notices, violation logs, and that's when the pattern appeared. Every homeowner who had been cited for commercial activity in the last 5 years shared one thing: they were profitable. They were independent. They didn't socialize with the board. Meanwhile, businesses run by board friends, ignored, overlooked, grandfathered. Melissa didn't enforce rules. She enforced leverage. I requested the enforcement history formally. Certified mail, public record request. 2 days later she called me directly, not an email, a call. Her tone was different, less authority, more control. "This doesn't need to escalate," she said. "We're just trying to keep the community balanced." Balanced? That's when I realized something important. This was never about zoning, never about noise, never about rules. This was about who was allowed to win. And Melissa didn't like that I was winning quietly. I didn't threaten, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't tell Melissa she was wrong, I let her talk. That was the mistake she made. After our call, she sent a follow-up email, short, polite, carefully worded, but careless. "The board has determined that your business activity creates an imbalance in the community. Not disruption, not noise, not traffic, imbalance." That word wasn't in the bylaws, not once. I read the HOA documents again. Line by line, every restriction required an objective impact. Noise, foot traffic signage, employees' safety risk. My business had none of it. So I replied, calmly, "Can you clarify what specific operational change caused this determination?" "My business activities, hours, and setup have remained unchanged since move-in," she answered within an hour. Too fast. The increase in client volume and revenue changes the nature of the activity. There it was, revenue, not behavior. Not impact, not a rule violation. Profit. That email locked everything. HOAs are allowed to regulate use. They are not allowed to regulate success. She had just admitted selective enforcement. I forwarded the thread to a compliance attorney. One-line response came back, "Tell them to proceed." So I did. I requested a formal hearing, public record, recorded minutes, legal notice attached. Melissa didn't like that. At the hearing, she tried to reset the narrative. She talked about community harmony. She talked about fairness. She talked around the question, so I read her email out loud, word for word. The room got quiet. Then I asked one question, "Can the board confirm that profit level is now a factor in enforcement?" No one answered. Melissa looked down at her notes. That silence mattered. Because in that moment, the HOA crossed from enforcement into discrimination, not against a person, against an outcome. And that's when the board's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. I didn't hear it, but I saw her face change. The confidence drained, because she realized something before anyone else did. She didn't just send an email, she wrote the case against herself. The hearing didn't end with shouting. That's what surprised me. It ended with discomfort, the kind that sits in the room and refuses to leave. Melissa tried to recover fast. She cleared her throat, adjusted her papers, switched tone. "This isn't about revenue," she said. "It's about preserving community standards." But she had already said too much. The board members weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. One of them asked a simple question. "Have we enforced this rule based on income before?" Melissa hesitated. That half-second pause was loud. She answered carefully, "Not directly." That word again, "not directly." Another board member leaned forward. So if nothing about his business operation changed, and enforcement only started after it became profitable, how is this not selective? Melissa opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "We have discretion." The board attorney shifted in his seat. Discretion wasn't the right word. A neighbor in the back raised his hand. "I run an online tax service," he said. "No one's ever contacted me." Another voice followed. "My wife does remote HR consulting, same setup." Then another, then another. Melissa's authority didn't collapse all at once. It leaked. Every example made the room heavier. The board attorney finally stepped in. "Let's pause," he said. "This hearing is now on record." That changed everything. Melissa stopped speaking. She knew why. On record meant discovery. Discovery meant emails. Emails meant patterns, and patterns are expensive. The board chair cleared his throat. "We'll need time to review enforcement consistency." That was the first concession. Melissa stared at the table. No eye contact, no interruptions, just quiet. The chair continued. "Until review is complete, enforcement is suspended." That was the second. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The room already knew who lost control. Melissa gathered her papers slowly, not angry, worried. Because she finally understood something important. This wasn't about stopping my business anymore. This was about explaining her behavior, and explanations are much harder than threats. Nothing happened the next day. No emails, no fines, no portal updates. That silence was intentional. When organizations realize they've gone too far, they don't apologize right away. They slow everything down. They stop writing. They stop speaking. They hope time will soften the record. A week passed, then two. The fines on my account were still there, but they were marked under review. No due dates, no penalties added, just frozen. Melissa didn't contact me again, not once. Instead, the HOA sent a general notice to the community. No names mentioned, no admissions made, just a short update saying the board was reviewing enforcement procedures to ensure consistency. That line told me everything. Consistency was the problem. Melissa was the source. At the next HOA meeting, she wasn't at the center of the table. She sat off to the side, quiet. The board chair did most of the talking. The attorney spoke more than usual. Decisions were deferred. Votes were recorded carefully. Melissa didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She didn't lead. That shift mattered more than any apology. A few days later, I received another email. This one wasn't from Melissa. It was from the board chair, short, neutral, professional. After review, the board has determined that your business is compliant with HOA guidelines. All enforcement actions related to this matter have been withdrawn. No explanation. No apology, just reversal. The fines disappeared from the portal the same day. The public notice came down quietly. No announcement, no correction, it was just gone. Melissa's name stopped appearing on enforcement emails after that. Other board members handled communication now. Slowly, carefully, she hadn't been removed, but she had been contained. That's how these things usually end, not with consequences you can see, with authority you can't use anymore. My business continued exactly as it always had. Same hours, same work, same clients. The only thing that changed was this: no one questioned it again, and Melissa, she avoided eye contact when we crossed paths, not out of anger. Out of awareness, because once control fails publicly, it never fully comes back. If this story hit close to home, you're not alone. A lot of people are dealing with HOAs, managers, or authority figures who rely more on confidence than actual rules. And most of the time, people lose not because they're wrong, but because they react too fast. That's what these stories are about. Not drama, not shouting matches, not revenge fantasies. Just real situations where patience, documentation, and clarity quietly win. If you want more real-world stories like this, where systems are tested, authority is questioned, and accountability actually happens, subscribe. No clickbait, no fake heroes, just real outcomes. And if you've ever been pushed by an HOA, a board, or someone who thought they had power they didn't, drop your story in the comments. Someone reading right now probably needs it.